All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're tackling Aristotle. I know, he's got that whole ancient Greek philosopher thing going on. Might seem a bit, well, dusty. But you've brought in a fascinating Wikipedia article, and let me tell you, it shows there was way more to this guy than just logic.
Oh, absolutely. Aristotle was all over the map, in a good way.
Hmm.
Natural sciences, philosophy, language, you name it, economics, politics, even art. It's mind-blowing how much ground he covered.
It really is. So before we get to the father of logic part, which we will promise, let's start with, the man himself. Basic facts. Born 384 BC, Stagira, Greece. Dad was a physician, which some folks think might have sparked his interest in, like, observing the world around him.
Makes sense, right? Though, to be honest, the details of his early life are a bit murky. And here's the real kicker. A lot of his original writings, gone, lost to time. What we've got are mainly lecture notes, treatises, that kind of thing. Not the final polished works he would have intended for, the public.
Wow. Makes you wonder what groundbreaking ideas are just gone. But okay, what we do know is that Aristotle was a student at, wait for it, Plato's Academy. Can you imagine those seminars? And then, get this, he becomes the tutor of Alexander the Great.
Talk about pressure. People still debate how much Aristotle influenced Alexander. Did his teachings shape how Alexander ruled? His views on leadership? Even maybe his whole conquering the world thing?
Heavy stuff. Speaking of passing down knowledge, though, let's get to what Aristotle's probably most famous for. Logic. The father of logic, the article says. But what does that even mean? Like, did people not know how to think logically before him?
Not exactly. It's more like he gave us the instruction manual for thinking straight. Aristotle formalized deductive reasoning, starting with some basic ideas, and then, using logic, boom, you reach a conclusion, step by step. Like a building an argument, but, an airtight one. And he wrote a whole bunch about it. His Organon, this collection of 6 works, gets into all the nitty-gritty.
6 works. Dedicated to logic. Okay, this guy was serious. And the article even gives an example of, like, an Aristotelian syllogism. All men are mortal. All Greeks are men. Therefore, all Greeks are mortal. I mean, kind of obvious, right?
The thing is, Aristotle didn't just state the obvious. He wanted to break down the why behind it. He went beyond the what to the underlying principles. And that's what's so cool about his work, especially in metaphysics.
Metaphysics, right. So instead of taking the world at face value, he wanted to, like, understand the mechanics behind it all.
Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. Aristotle's view of reality was different from his teacher, Plato. Aristotle believed in what we call immanent realism. Basically, those universal concepts, like the idea of appleness. He thought those existed within the physical objects themselves.
So an apple's appleness is built in. It's not separate from it.
You got it. Unlike Plato. See, Plato's theory of form said that those universal ideas, they exist as like these perfect, unchanging forms in some other realm.
Huh.
So every apple we see is just a flawed copy of that perfect apple form.
Okay, so Plato thought the blueprint of an apple existed somewhere else entirely. Aristotle's like, nope, the blueprint's in the apple itself.
Perfect analogy. Aristotle was much more grounded in the physical world.
Hmm.
And another big idea he explored was the link between potentiality and actuality. It's how he explained change and growth. Like, think of a tiny seed. It has the potential to become a huge tree. That tree is its actuality, its fully realized form.
So Aristotle gave us a way to understand not only what something is, but also what it could become. I like
Wow.
that. But he wasn't just sitting around thinking about these abstract ideas, right? This guy was out there observing the natural world too.
Oh, absolutely. Physics, biology, astronomy, geology, meteorology, he did it all. And he was incredibly thorough. The article says he spent 2 whole years on the island of Lesbos, just observing marine life. He even produced these descriptions that were surprisingly accurate, even by modern standards.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, for instance, he described the octopus's reproductive arm in detail. Centuries later, scientists were like, nah, that can't be right. Turns out Aristotle was right all along.
Wow, that's some serious observation skills. And it makes you wonder, was he on the verge of figuring out evolution way back then?
That's a great question. He clearly understood the connection between an animal's form and how it functioned. But how far did that understanding go? Something to ponder. We'll have to pick that up when we come back for part 2 of our Aristotle deep dive. It really makes you think, though, doesn't it? Like, here's this guy thousands of years ago grappling with ideas we're still trying to wrap our heads around today.
It's true. And speaking of things we're still trying to figure out, let's talk about the human mind, because the article also delves into Aristotle's theories about the soul.
Right, so he actually proposed that there are 3 kinds of souls: vegetative, sensitive, and rational.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. That sounds a little out there for me.
I know it sounds a little strange, right? But stick with me. He said the vegetative soul is responsible for basic life functions, like growing and eating.
So that's like plants, animals, humans, everything.
Exactly. Then there's the sensitive soul, which allows for sensation, movement, even emotions. Animals have that one.
Makes sense. So then the rational soul, that's what makes humans special.
You got it. The rational soul is all about deliberate choices, abstract thought, pondering those big existential questions.
Huh. I wonder what he would have made of artificial intelligence then.
Right. Would he say AI has a rational soul? Or is it something unique to humans? It's a fascinating question to think about. And speaking of fascinating but not entirely accurate, the article mentions how Aristotle believed that the heart, not the brain, was the center of intelligence.
Oh, yeah. Not his finest moment there. Poor guy, if only he knew.
Uh-huh, right. But hey, he got something spot on. Like his ideas about memory, he saw it as the ability to hold and distinguish mental images.
So like mental snapshots, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he even came up with these things called laws of association to explain how our thoughts connect.
Oh, you mean like how one thought leads to another?
Precisely.
Yeah.
He identified three main principles: similarity, contrast, and contiguity. We remember things because they're similar to something else, or because they're different, or because they happen close together in time or space.
Wow. It's like he was mapping out the architecture of memory.
In a way, he was. And what's really cool is how relatable some of his ideas are even today. Like take dreams, for instance. Did you know that he didn't believe they were prophetic or messages from the gods?
Really? So what did he think they were?
He was surprisingly modern, in his view. He believed dreams were simply echoes of our sensory experiences rooted in our daily lives.
So basically our brains just remixing our waking reality.
Exactly. He even compared the logic of dreams to how someone deeply in love might see their beloved everywhere. It might not make sense logically, but it makes sense emotionally.
I like that. That's a great way to put it. So it seems like Aristotle was all about exploring both the inner world of the mind and the outer world of human action and ethics.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
In fact, he believed that living a virtuous life was the key to achieving what he called eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia. Sounds intense. What does that even mean?
It's often translated as happiness, but it's more than just feeling good. It's about flourishing, living up to your full potential as a human being by being virtuous.
So it's not just about feeling happy, but about living a truly good life.
Exactly. And for Aristotle, this wasn't some passive state. You had to work at it, cultivate good habits, make choices that aligned with virtue. He was all about that self-improvement life.
It sounds like he had a very proactive approach to ethics, but the article also mentions how important politics was to his philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. He famously said, "Man is by nature a political animal." He truly believed we're meant to live in communities. He saw the city-state, the polis, as the ideal setting for humans to thrive, to exercise their reason, to participate in civic life.
But didn't he also believe in a pretty strict social hierarchy? Like some people are born to rule and others are born to be ruled? That doesn't really jive with modern ideas about democracy.
It's true that his views on social structure might seem a bit rigid by today's standards. But remember, he was writing in a very different time and context. His analysis of different political systems, though, remains incredibly insightful.
So he wasn't necessarily saying one system was inherently better than another?
Not quite. He categorized them based on who held power and in whose interest they ruled. He looked at monarchy, aristocracy, polity, tyranny, oligarchy, democracy. He analyzed the potential pros and cons of each system.
It's interesting how he seemed to take this really balanced approach, acknowledging the strengths and weaknesses of each form of government.
That's Aristotle for you, always searching for balance. For him, the ideal system depended on the specific circumstances of the society. He stressed the importance of finding that sweet spot between different forms of power to achieve stability and justice.
It makes sense that he'd apply that same balanced thinking to politics. It's like he was saying it's not just about who's in charge, but how they rule and what their goals are.
Exactly. It was all about finding the right fit for a particular society. And that focus on balance and practicality wasn't limited to his political views either. The article also mentions how he tackled economic questions.
It did. And you know what caught my eye? His views on money. He seemed to have this surprisingly modern understanding of its role in society.
He really did. He recognized the importance of money as a medium of exchange, making transactions smoother and all that. But at the same time, he was wary of the potential downsides of wealth and unchecked greed.
It's incredible how his concerns about the corrupting influence of wealth are still so relevant today, especially with all the conversations about economic inequality.
Right. He was especially critical of making money through interest. He believed wealth should come from productive activities, not just financial maneuvering, which is a pretty radical stance even now.
It really makes you think about how these ideas from, what, over 2,000 years ago are still part of the conversation today.
Right, it's like some of his economic worries, even if they sound a bit old-fashioned now, were pointing toward these bigger issues about wealth, about fairness, that we're still wrestling with.
Totally. But you know what else is fascinating to me? Going back to something we touched on earlier, Aristotle's hands-on approach to understanding nature. That's not your typical philosopher.
Totally. Not just talking about the world, but going out and studying it.
Exactly. His work in biology. It's not every day you find someone equally at ease debating political theory and dissecting a squid, you know?
It's that blend of deep thinking and real-world observation that makes him so unique.
Yeah.
And we talked about his marine biology already, but the article gets into his broader work on animals too, right? How form relates to function.
Yeah.
He was getting incredibly close to what we now call evolutionary theory.
It blows my mind to think, what if he'd had the tools we have now? Microscopes, labs, all that.
Can you imagine? But even without those, his contribution to science is massive, laying the groundwork for how we study animals, that meticulous observation, description, categorization of species. It all goes back to him.
It's incredible how he bridged that gap between philosophical thought and actually getting your hands dirty, doing experiments. That wasn't always a given back then.
It's that bridge that makes him so important, this link between ancient thinkers and the birth of modern science. He wasn't content to just think about stuff. He wanted to test it in the real world.
And that brings us to another area where his influence is still huge. Rhetoric. The art of persuasion. And let me tell you, his work on this is like Rhetoric 101 even today.
Totally. It's amazing how relevant his ideas still are. Even if you're not, writing a big speech, understanding ethos, pathos, logos, it helps you understand how arguments work, how people try to convince each other.
Ethos, building your credibility, right? Pathos, hitting those emotions. And logos, good old logic, they're so simple but so powerful.
Aristotle understood that being persuasive wasn't just about having the smartest argument. It was about connecting with your audience on different levels, understanding that human element.
And it wasn't just about winning either. The article makes it clear he saw rhetoric as crucial for a functioning society.
Yeah.
For debate, for discussion, for making good decisions together.
It was about using language to understand the world better. And that appreciation for language, it wasn't limited to just arguing, right? Aristotle had a lot to say about art, too, especially in his poetics.
Oh, yeah. He got into tragedy, comedy, epic poetry, breaking down their structure, their themes, how they affect us as an audience. I was really struck by his analysis of Oedipus Rex, which is still studied today.
Amazing, right? How he breaks a story down into its parts. Plot, characters, themes, the language itself, even the spectacle of it. He saw art as mimesis, imitation, but not just copying. It was about revealing deeper truth about being human.
It's mind-blowing how one person could have such an impact on so many fields. Looking back at this Wikipedia article, it's just the breadth of his work, the depth from logic and metaphysics to marine biology and poetry. It's like he had this never-ending thirst for knowledge.
And it's that curiosity, that rigor, that makes him such a giant in the history of thought. The article mentions Islamic scholars called him the first teacher, which says it all, really.
It does. And, more than just what he knew, it's how he approached learning that inspires me. Never stop asking questions, never stop exploring. That fearlessness to challenge what everyone thinks they know, to get your hands dirty, literally and figuratively. That's something we can all learn from.
It's that drive, that commitment to lifelong learning that makes a real impact no matter what you're passionate about.
So if there's one thing to take away from this deep dive on Aristotle, it's this. Never stop being curious. Who knows, maybe in a few thousand years, someone will be doing a deep dive on your Wikipedia article.
Now that is a goal worth striving for.
It really is. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the world of Aristotle.
Anytime.
Thank you for listening. If you love history, don't forget to subscribe to History with Bree and Peter. Join us for more fascinating stories from the past. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode.